think about stuff.
Well, welcome back to the Pastor Pod. We're glad you're with us for another exciting episode. Today, we are with a good friend of ours that we've had on the Pastor Pod a few times, Bob Bumgarner. And of course, I'm here with my good friend and co-host, Jay Mudd.
Hey,
man.
Bob, good to have you back here on the podcast.
Thank you. It's good to be here. It's good to be here.
We are covering Florida from the north to the central to what part are you in? You're on an island, Josh. I can never figure out where you're at. Down there in what are you on the West Coast? Yeah. No, you're on the West Coast.
Yeah, I'm on the West Coast. Yep.
West Coast, an island on the West Coast. So covering Florida this morning. So as many of you guys know, Bob Bumgarner is a mission strategist in the Jacksonville area. Bob, it's great to have you back here on the podcast today. How are you doing?
We're doing well. Churches are doing well. The Don't Pastor Alone strategy is catching on, and had several pastors text me on Easter afternoon talking about not high attendance, but baptisms and salvation. So that was a fun thing.
You know, Bob, I got to say this wasn't planned and part of the script here. And so, but Bob, I think one of the things I'm always encouraged when I talk to you is you've done something. So I'm a church planter. I love church planting, everything about it. Josh has planted churches. But Bob, you've done something really unique with an association of churches. I've said this, I've kind of pinged it as this idea that I really believe you replanted an association with the whole do not pastor alone and the model you're doing. It's one of the coolest things I've seen with association of churches is how you everything from the way you've designed the associational space to the things that you're doing and how you're organizing it. And I think there's a good testament to what you just said of the things that are being celebrated are the very things that a church planter would celebrate is not necessarily the attendance, even though that's important, but the salvations and the baptism. So the testament to what you're doing. And so what's a website somebody could go to and check out what's happening at First Coast Church? What's the website?
Yeah, it's First Coast Churches, plural.com.
Okay.
Yeah. And it's what we've really tried to do is make it about the churches. I mean, this is really, we're trying to tell the story. I have a conviction that if you listen to the field and the Holy Spirit, they will lead you to the future. And so you don't have to try to create it. You just have to listen. It involves a lot of, listening to people and trying to get some perspective. Rick Wheeler, when he was here, he handed me a healthy association. But then after COVID, we did have to do some pretty big shifts to respond to the pastoral stress that was happening. One of the things that when we hired Mark McDonald to come in and help us to do that, he's written the book Be Known for Something. If you've not read that book or your listeners haven't read it, I would certainly encourage that. But one of the things that happened is after we came up with our Don't Pastor Alone thread, Lifeway and Barna came out with their research on pastor, just the need to be resilient as pastors. And we really felt like it was God affirming and confirming what the body and the field had already told us. And so we were able to move forward with a little bit of confidence that we had heard the Holy Spirit, in the previous discussions.
Well, again, that also needs to make another point here before we even get into our conversation. If you're not a note taker, you should be finding a piece of paper, and because Bob's going to do that, I just knowing Bob, he's going to drop some kind of resource, and you're laughing. If you're not ready, you may have to hit rewind or back 15-second little button. Bob, what was the name of that book you just dropped for us?
It's called Be Known for Something.
Okay.
And the author is Mark McDonald. He actually lives here in Florida. He's a good friend. He's become a good friend. And anyway, so use him as a resource.
Yeah. And so First Coast Churches, that's plural, there in Jacksonville. I would encourage you to check that out. And again, I don't know the state of it was when you got here. I think you said it was healthy. I've just watched it from afar, just watched what you've done. Been really, really super encouraged by that. But hey, if that's any insight of what we're going to be getting into today, Josh, that is, I'm excited. I'm excited for our time. So let's lean into that a little bit, Bob. Let me just kick things off by asking you a fun question, because I know you I've been through personal things with you where you're like, Jay, you've helped me discover my, how God uniquely put me together. And
Right.
so I kind of want to put the question there because I know you're gonna answer it, and you're gonna answer it well. This idea of like you believe God has uniquely put you together, created you,
Right.
with this idea of like you really do a great job of investing in leaders. And so, could you help us understand a little bit why you believe God and how you believe God has
Right.
uniquely put you together for this purpose of what you're doing in Jacksonville?
Mhm.
But also, I think it'll help us understand a little bit better of how, yeah, God does uniquely put us together, and we do have these unique qualities about us. So, help us understand a little bit. How has God uniquely put you together to lead
Sure.
leaders?
Well, I grew up in a military family, which is that's important because it put me in Wichita, Kansas, when I was in my formative, high school and college years. And at that particular point, I knew God had called me into ministry, but I was a part of a church that, I mean, in Kansas, you either had a pastor, a youth pastor, or a worship pastor. And I didn't feel really called, to be honest with you, to be any of those things. But I knew God had called me. And so I actually went to seminary, responded and went to Southwestern Seminary to that call to be a family therapist. While I was there, um, uh, God just said that's not it. And so, out of a pure pragmatic decision, it seemed like, uh, I ended up getting an MDiv. And I left seminary, went to live in my mother and father-in-law's basement because I was so popular. But anyway, eventually ended up in Ohio, and it was in a replant. We'd call it a replant now, in a place called Middletown, Ohio. And for 3 years, God did amazing things. I was a senior pastor. He taught me all kinds of stuff. But in the middle of that, again, just listening to the field and listening to the Holy Spirit, I led a group of men who were mill workers through experiencing God. That was when it was still new. And God shifted my life. I thought I was doing it for them, but I was doing it for me. And he showed me that senior pastoring is not what I was going to do. So I was actually on my way back to seminary when a friend of mine called and said, "Hey, what are you doing? What's God doing?" I told him. He said, "Come and do that here. I can't confer the degree." So anyway, I went to be executive pastor for Lee Shepherd here in Jacksonville, and God did some amazing things that would be a whole nother story. But anyway, but I got overwhelmed and burned out a little bit, really. I mean, you've heard of burning your candle at both ends. I didn't know that your candle could have more than two ends, and so I had a fireball. And while I was successful, though, I mean, I was successful, but not in a healthy way. And so I actually went to Willow Creek for their first summit and didn't know about a Willow Creek. It was kind of one of those Southwest Airlines need to get away. And I just went. And then I experienced this thing called network, which was the first time anybody ever said to me, "Hey, your passion, your spiritual gifts, your calling, all are intertwined together." And so I went to the early bird thing and did that. And it was so changed my life that I have actually made every career decision I've made from that point forward to align with that decision. I'm now 60. And so that was in my 20s. And so it was just at every phase in my life, I just focused more and more on that. And the power of focus doesn't seem as obvious. It seems like intensity is important when you're young, but focus and consistency is what moves mountains. And so that's really, and I've had tons of people speak into me. I've had bosses that were multipliers who, I remember a huge failure I had with my Dr. Jim Chavis. He believed in me. He put me in front of the highest level executive team at the Florida Baptist Convention. Because of some internet issues, my presentation failed. And on the way out to the car, he's 6'5". He had his arm around me, and he said, "Bumgarner, what did you learn?" And I said, "I made up something. I had no idea what I learned." And he said, "You learn to bring a hard copy next time." Yeah, I mean, just I had guys that made me not think that failure was.
Right.
They gave me big opportunities, and a lot of them worked. But when they didn't make the failure feel like it was final. And so I have been extremely blessed by the people that God has put into my life. And so
Wow.
that's kind of how God has shaped me. I don't have a doctorate, but I have, and this is not a statement against education at all. He's educated me in other ways. He's brought me to where he wants me to be through the means that he wanted to use, if that makes sense.
Well, Bob, I think you're brilliant. I mean, you just fell into an MDiv. I mean, you just accidentally got an MDiv. That's what you said. So, for a guy who just accidentally got an MDiv, you're brilliant.
That's right.
That's what I would say.
I know me and Jay have benefited from your investment, so we appreciate that. So I guess what are some of the roadblocks you're seeing, or maybe even what are you seeing lately that leaders are needing most? And that's a
Well,
broad question, but like what are maybe in Jacksonville, but even
yeah.
beyond?
Well, what leaders need most really is to keep growing wherever you are. Keep growing, because the mission field keeps changing. And what growing means, I don't hear what I'm not saying. Read books and listen to podcasts and read blogs and that kind of stuff, but keep growing. Know what your own potholes are. Like, know what stops you from growing. Like, if I were to say what I'm seeing among pastors in our network is there's pastors that are neglecting their own personal warning lights. You know how dashes have warning lights that, the fuel gauge says you need gas in so many miles or whatever, your tires are low, those kind of things. I'm noticing that pastors are not necessarily paying attention to the warning lights for their soul. What I would say is your body matters, your emotions matter, your soul matters if you're going to stay a growing leader for a lifetime. Because ministry can, honestly, the work of ministry can actually beat the life of ministry out of you if you don't stay connected to the vine in helpful ways. I can tell you this, my warning signs, if we just want to get real here, is I know when I'm not in a good place, when I feel discontent, when I'm kind of just generally angry. I don't have a reason to be angry, but I'm just kind of irritable. When I feel like binging Netflix, when envy and lust start kind of popping their head up, all those kind of things are warning signs for me. And what it reminds me is that most of us were never taught to have a replenishment system. How did we replenish? How do we do things that actually give energy, restore us? We talk a lot about sabbaticals, but we don't take a Sabbath. And guys, a sabbatical is just a bunch of Sabbaths strung together. So, we gotta have a replenishment system. Another thing that I have found that we need if we're going to be a growing leader is most of us don't have any plan for personal or professional feedback. Nobody has permission to say, hey, you seem really stuck in your life. Have you ever thought about working on an issue in your walk with God? Who does that for you or for us? As a matter of fact, I went ahead and put in the chat a link. If you guys want to give it out, it goes to our website that talks about the Don't Pastor Alone challenge. And it really just asks the questions: who are the truth tellers in your life, and in which areas? Truth tellers are those kind of people that you have given permission, you've actually invited them to speak into your life in various ways. I will say this, that if you remember King David, that Proverbs 18:1 says this: whoever isolates himself seeks his own desire. He breaks out against all sound judgment. So another thing that I know is when I feel like isolating, there's nothing good on the other side of isolating for a pastor. Remember the story, or not the story, but the biblical account in Samuel about David? I'll just read it to you. It says here, in the spring of the year, the time when the kings go out to battle, David sent Joab and his servants with him and all of Israel, and they ravaged the Ammonites and besieged Rabbah, but David remained at Jerusalem. And so, wow, you could just hear the background music, right? It's just David set himself up in isolation to have a really, really bad failure. And so, anyway, those are some things that I have found and observed. And I would just add one more thing. In a culture that is so Instagrammy and all those kind of things, Jay, what replenishes you may not replenish Josh. You have to re-engage your own unique growth engine. You may need a mentor for something that Jay doesn't need a mentor for, and that's completely okay. And so anyway, I'll stop and let you guys respond to that.
No, I think that's huge, and I think I'm sitting over here trying to, again, every time I meet with Bob, I know there's going to be things that I need to write down. I think one of the things that you said that was just so it's not like earth shattering. It's not like maybe even profound, but it's this idea that most of us were never taught how to have a replenishment system, and I think that's this discipleship 101, and it comes back to when we get around other people and when nobody's pouring into those things. Like, we want to teach people how to do how to do this model or that model, or set up this system, but the replenishment system, the basics of it. And I laughed when you said the warning lights on your dashboards. I drive an older Jeep now where the lights are coming on, and I find myself ignoring them because I'm like, I just know that's going to cost money. And honestly, that's what a Jeep does. Is that's what a Jeep. It's supposed to look like a Christmas tree.
Yeah.
Not really, but the reality is my brake light is on, and then my brake is not engaged. That's how bad my Jeep is now at this point. Is the lights are just coming on, and I'm laughing about that. But at the same time, maybe people don't even know how to identify the lights they don't even know those lights in their life because no one's ever taught them to identify them. They're going off, but they don't even know what they are. They kind of see it from a distance, but they're kind of, I don't even know what that is. And I think that's huge. Because I can even think back to early on when, a teenager, I surrendered my life to Christ. I can't remember a time where I was sat down and discipled in these very basic, common, things that are necessary. And so I hear what you're saying, and I think it's extremely important for leaders to heed that advice of, knowing how to identify the lights and setting up a system where you can replenish yourself, because otherwise you're going to end up burning your candle at both ends, or a fireball, like you said. Josh, what you got anything from his last comment there?
Yeah, I mean, the timing of this is good for me. I've had some throat tightness this week, and just kind of probably recovery from the last weekend, but just some extra stress. I just being completely transparent. Just some extra out of nowhere anxiety that is just kind of like, it's crazy because before we started recording, Bob's like, how was Easter? And I'm like, well, we saw some cool stories, and for our church, we had record attendance, which, praise the Lord for that. We saw new people come, and those are all good things, and we're praising God for that. But I will say, on a personal level, with all of that said, I mean, of course, we gave the staff Monday off. We want everybody to replenish, but like for me, I didn't replenish on Monday. Like it took me all day to just come down and off the whatever it was that I was feeling. So, and then just I have my own health issues. Like, everybody's body's different. So so like stress attacks me in different ways. And so I've had to be really honest with Cassidy this week and saying, hey, this is what I'm feeling. I don't know why. Like my dad has similar wiring as I do. Like, our parents, of course, pass things down. So sometimes I just go to the point where all of a sudden I'm like, why do I feel like this? And it's like, I should have listened a week ago or 2 weeks ago. And I'm not saying, I guess that for those of you that are listening that might relate to me, I don't have an off switch. I'm usually 100% or I completely shut down. So I am learning to Sabbath. I'm learning to do those things, but I do think I have to have someone coach me, lean into me, and really tell me to my face, you need to slow down. Because I don't like to slow down. I enjoy what I do. I know you guys do as well. Like I look forward to going to the office. I mean, some days are harder than others, or there might be needs in the church, or people that need help and support. But for me, just being completely transparent today, like, this is great for me because whether it's health wise, whether it's emotional, whether it's spiritual, like you said, Bob, where you just want to, some days if I'm not healthy, like, I don't want to hang out with people. And I'm an extrovert. I'm not a highly extrovert, but I'm an extrovert. So that just shows like something's not right.
That's a warning. Yeah. So that's a great illustration of, that's a warning light. So one day not wanting to hang out, that's no big deal. But if you find yourself avoiding, like, guys, I've talked to 2 pastors in our network this week that both of you know that you would, I'm not going to betray who they are, but you would be blown away that they're talking about the exact thing about the pull to isolation the pull to disconnection, and that's not who they are. And so Josh, I think it's a key that, like, I was honored that they would call me and tell me that, like, I was evidently a safe person for them to be able to say that to. So who are you a safe person to? You know, that could be that, call them a 2 a.m. friend, whatever you want to call them, that they can actually tell you what's really, going on. And I don't think that ever happens until you start modeling it. Like, I think you have to be vulnerable first if you want people to lean into you. One of the things I found with leaders, and not just young leaders, but young leaders too, is that when it comes to growth, they really don't know where to start. Where do I start with trying to grow? And I would say to you, this is a little counterintuitive, but start with an area that you're already good at. Strengthen areas that you're already good at. Go into the idea that God has designed you uniquely. Start strengthening the areas that he has called you to. Just because you have a gift doesn't mean you're good at it. So start accumulating knowledge and reps. I call them reps. What are the reps that you can do in a strength area? And if there is a pain point that continually nags you, then address the pain point. So if you need to put a system in, or or whatever, but don't in growing, don't find 10 pain points that you want to improve. No, find 3 strengths that you want to add value to get better at, and 1 pain point that you're going to try to manage. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that is also something really, really wise that you're saying there. Just because you have a gift doesn't mean you're good at it. Don't stop growing. Don't stop growing. Never stop nurturing that gift. Never stop. I think that's huge. And Bob, I think one of the things you're hitting on here is so important. We're beating around it. Sort of, we started with, First Coast churches and that, and you're talking about who's somebody you can trust, and you're talking about you honored somebody would call you. Really, what it comes down to is networking, and having a network around you. And we talked about this briefly on some of our other podcasts and things of that sort. But I just moved back to the state of Florida from Boston, where I feel like that was the best example of a network I've ever been a part of. And Boston was a group of pastors who really genuinely loved one another. I knew I could call 5 or 6 pastors at any point in time, say, "Hey, look, I'm having this struggle," and they would lend an ear, they would encourage, they would support, they wouldn't let your failure be, your last final straw,
Right.
or they would call you out, things of that sort. Since being back in Florida now, I'm struggling personally to find that network, and I'm finding myself going, I'm having to work to create a network because there's not one that I can just jump into. And I think, Bob, one of the things that I don't think I'm alone in that,
No,
and
I don't
maybe I
think so
am.
either.
And if I'm alone in that, I need, I don't want to pastor alone. Hint, hint. Again,
Yeah.
but it's this idea, Bob, is I think networking is something that a lot of pastors are struggling with for whatever reason it might be. But I want to talk to you specifically, who has an ear on this and listening to this. Help us understand, because really all this comes down to is networking. What are some of the reasons why that maybe leaders are struggling to fit into or find and connect with a group of pastors? And I'm going to say this and again, I love some denominational work, but I think even more beyond that, we've got to get beyond that. I don't think denominations are doing it really well these days. I think we need to really work really hard at figuring out how to create networks that can maybe even remove some barriers that have been put in place in the past. So help us understand that. What are you seeing? How can you encourage leaders listening in going, overcoming some of these barriers that are in the way of people finding true network?
Yeah, so there's a couple of things. And I would say this. This will be a funny story. When Dr. Sullivan invited me to come to the convention, I said to him, we had been friends. He went to the church that I went to. And I said, "Doc," I said, "I'm willing to come." I said 2 things. I probably won't retire from the convention. And secondly, I've never called anybody at the convention for help. I've always just found people who are a little farther ahead of me in ministry and learned from them and befriended them. And that's a little bit of my spirit. I mean, I still am that guy, and but I know I'm wearing a denominational shirt. So here's what I would say. Every leader that listens to this podcast, at the very minimum, needs two things to be effective. They need perspective and support. They need to understand who they are, and they need to understand what their mission field is requiring right this minute. And so when you have perspective, you can take a best next step. Not the best next step, a best next step. And I want to talk about language in just a minute. And support, what do they need? They need somebody who believes in them and can add value to them personally. Okay. You never outgrow that. I mean, that's just perspective and support. Perspective is, put that somewhere. You got to have perspective to know what a best next step is, and you got to have support. And the reason I think that people don't network, it's not because they're not extroverted. I think it's pride and fear. I think pride and fear keeps people from networking. Pride, thinking you don't need it. Fear, thinking that other people will think less of you if you are vulnerable with them. And here's the thing. I have found it to be just the opposite. There are things I don't know that I don't know, and I need somebody to speak those things into my life. Vulnerability actually raises my credibility with the people. Street cred goes up when you not air dirty laundry. That's not what I'm talking about. But when you're vulnerable about your leadership. And so anyway, one of the things I would say to people listening is maybe I want to give you permission, not permission, I want to affirm the fact that denominations are one of the places, and I'm talking about associations and state conventions and national agencies. They're one of the places that you can find people to network with. The lazy man's way is to think that if you're a part of an association, that is your network. Well, it's only a potential network if you haven't engaged anybody, right? And so you have to know what you need in a network. And what I would say to you is, and your listeners, is to know yourself well enough to build the network that you need to do what God has called you to do. Don't worry about, I mean, I hope people will support the First Coast churches, but that's not my goal. My goal is to be the network that adds value to church planters, revitalizers, and those kind of things, to be an easy button where you can find people to network with. Let me give you some labels. And again, this is on that link I put in the chat. But most of us need these kinds of people in our life. We need a skillful coach. I've done that for both of you guys. In other words, somebody who can ask you the right question and kind of peek under the hood. So all of us need somebody we trust that's a skillful coach. We need a bold challenger, somebody who is not afraid or impressed by you that they won't challenge you. We need a wise guide. You might call that a mentor, but somebody who you can call up and say, hey man, don't coach me. Don't ask me a question. If you were in this situation right now, what would you do? All of us need that person. We all need a traveling companion, that person who's known us for a long, long time, that you might talk to them for 3 months, but when you call them, you just pick up and they can remind you of how bad you were in seminary or whatever. You need a ministry partner. This is really, probably on your staff somewhere. Or if you don't have a staff, it's probably a key layman or an elder or something like that. But those are people that are helping you do ministry where you are. Notice I say ministry partner. I'm not talking about a ministry advisor. I'm talking about somebody that you're equally yoked with. You need somebody in your constellation who speaks truth to you from the ministry that you're doing. You need that trusted confidant. You need the person who can be your secret keeper. Hey, I'm really struggling with this sin today. Can or I'm thinking about tapping out. Like I'm really thinking about, whatever, but they won't freak out. They'll just be with you biblically. And that, then I'm convinced that everybody, if you're a young leader, you need an old dude. If you're an old dude, you need young leaders. You need a Timothy or a Paul in your life. To give you the perspective that doesn't come to you naturally. And then the last person I think that you need to have in your network is what I just call a next phase practitioner. And so whatever your next best step is, you need somebody who's already ahead of you in that, so that you can ask them what are some best practices that they may know of in that whole process. I will say this: one of the things that I think has to change is how we talk about growth. I think most of us need to change our language. I think we need to quit trying to be the best. I think that's unattainable. You don't have the resources for it or the bandwidth for it. I think excellence is a horrible core value. It is, I think it leans toward pride. And I think being your best is a great value. And you'll actually get better year over year because you'll grow and best will change. But I like progress language. So what does it look like? I'm growing if I'm making progress month over month or year over year. If I'm doing my best with the resources that I have. I remember when I was in that replant in Ohio, I had a guy come to me who thought he was helping me. He was somebody who was generous with the church, and he said, "Brother Bob, we haven't had any baptisms in a while. What's going on?" And I listened to him, and what he was saying to me was it was my responsibility to get baptisms back up. And what I said to him is this: I said, "Look, I didn't take credit when we were getting the baptisms, when baptisms were up. I'm not going to take the blame when we're doing what we know to do and God's not sending people here and we're not seeing baptisms." So I think that the language of growth, your paradigm for growth and progress and what you can actually do, can keep you from being depressed, can keep you from going crazy in an imperfect world where you're trying to lead imperfect people and you're an imperfect leader.
It's great.
I think it's so huge what you're saying today. It's just taking it all in. When it comes to like networks, I would agree with Jay. I was very blessed in Jacksonville through you and through so many. We're trying to develop more of that here. Actually, in Southwest Florida, we have some guys getting together next week to talk about better ideas to strengthen and create new ideas. So what would you say to a group of pastors? Now, this is multi-denominational, which is
right. Sure.
It's an extra level of fun. And you learn from each other. What would you say would be great talking points? Like if you were to sit with, 8 or 9 guys from different backgrounds, some all different sizes, all different, I guess you could say flavors.
Right.
What are the key elements that you think will help grow the network, not just with more people, but like, why are we here, or like, why are we doing this? What are some of those guiding questions or things that you think we should really hit on?
Yeah, I think I think if you're going to be in a network, you got to have the long view. So you invite your original group of people to the network, and you give everybody 5 minutes, 10 minutes, whatever, to tell who they are, what's going on, how they got to where they are, and this may sound awkward, but what they're good at. Like, what do you feel like you're really kind of, I like this question. What's your superpower? No, don't be humble here. What is it that you feel like you really have a grasp on? So that you actually know that, like, if you have 10 guys, maybe one guy's good at strategic planning, one guy's really a gifted communicator, somebody else is gifted social media or whatever, what the resources are in the room. Number one, that automatically makes Jay able to call Bill, who offline. He may not want to ask a question about social media within the group, but he may call offline. So network means that you're creating links, if you will, relational links to people of skill, to people who have some competence. If I'm getting together with a group of people to do a network kind of thing, what I like to do is to say, okay, guys, I like to form the agenda in the meeting. Hey guys, what do we need to talk about today? And just say, if you were the only person in the room, what would you want to talk about? And just make a long list, make 10, if it's 10 people and it's 10 different things, then rank order them, vote, give everybody 3 votes. Hey, we're going to talk about 3 of these things today, and then just rank order those, and then just start talking about it. If you're really organized, you could do that a little ahead of time, and rank order them and say, hey, these are the 3 things that we're going to talk about. So in that meeting, you can say, in the rank ordered piece, you could say, okay, we're number 1, we're talking about child safety on campus. What are some resources that you guys use? What are some processes that you guys can share? It's not really the place in my mind, it's not really the place for the subject matter expert to do a download. It's really about, can you send me a document? Can we talk later? What are the 7 things? You know what I mean? So to me, those are I'll tell you one thing that I have found to be helpful. It's called a problem statement. And a problem statement simply is, you ask the question, if we're going to make more disciples in our association, what are the 3 things that our churches need to start doing more of? And what are 3 things that our churches need to do less of? And throw that up on anytime you can visualize thinking around a scenario, you have just amplified your ability to get some value out of the network, if that makes sense.
That's good.
Yeah.
Thank you.
That is really good. And I'm going back to some of the things you've said just over this whole conversation here. And Bob, just having the right people around you in your network is so important. I had somebody yesterday tell me, and Josh, you've said it, and I wonder if it's just because you're really close. We're really good friends, Josh and I are. Some people might not think that, some of the banter we have here on the podcast, but Josh and I are really good friends. And Josh, you and Alan have told me multiple times that I don't like, I don't even know how to word the way you said it, of like, I don't like people to take care of me or certain, whatever it may be, right? When I go down there, I'm like, no, you don't have to do anything for me. I had somebody else tell me that yesterday, and it hit differently. I don't know what that was. Somebody else said that the other day, and it hit really, really differently, and it really stung on a different level than Josh is saying it. And again, maybe it's because there's a weird line for Josh and of like how much we joke, but it stung a little bit. And I texted the guy, a couple hours later. I said, I really needed to hear that today, because it's a blind spot, it's a pitfall, it's a hole in my leadership. And I needed that. So I'm affirming what you're saying, and the fact that there's times where we need people in our lives that could say the difficult things, the people that come alongside us and support us. We need to create those circles where we can be in, as Bob, you were just talking about, of how you can have people that are further along than us, people that are not as far along, kind of place yourself maybe almost in that middle ground where you're putting people in your life that you can coach and you can encourage and then people, beyond you as well. And so, Bob, I want to come back around to you and just ask, what are some of the things right now in your life, personally, ministry wise, whatever it is, that, you threw it out earlier. I'm not giving any information you haven't already given. You're 60 years old. You've been in ministry a long time now. It could be easy for you to go, okay, I'm at a spot now but I know you're not, where I'm like, okay, I'm not going to learn too much more at this point, but that's not your case. So as a 60-year-old leader of leaders, is the category I would put you in, is what are you learning? What are some of the things that you're learning personally, ministry wise, that they don't have to be new or insightful or, whatever it may be, but what are some of the things you're learning? Because I think it's helpful for us to just hear transparent, like, what is Bob learning right now?
Yeah, so this is it. So when I first started off as a leader, I felt like my value was being smart and getting things done. Then I went to a phase where not just knowing stuff, but actually being able to tell other people what to do. That's kind of my second conversion. Like I was the doer, then I was the teller. I was the mobilizer or whatever. Then I moved into the phase of multiplication. Like this is really about helping other people be good. I'm in the phase now of handing off. And so let me give you an example. Jimbo Stewart works on our team. If you don't know Jimbo, he's with the North American Mission Board. He's replanted a church. He's a revitalization expert, for the North American Mission Board, and he does a wonderful job. I feel blessed to have him as a friend and to have him on the team. But I'll just share with you exactly. I'll just be super raw. Jimbo has done he has revitalized one church as a senior pastor. I have revitalized 3 churches, and I have helped dozens and dozens in my 17-year role in the Florida Baptist Convention. So when I came here, I had to make a choice. Am I going to be the expert in revitalization and tell Jimbo what to do on our team? Or am I going to let Jimbo be the revitalization expert and be his helper? I have chosen the second. It is not without pain. It is not without it's a discipline. I'm just being square. It's a discipline to hand off something that you are inherently good at to the next generation, because they're going to be here 30 years longer than you're going to be here, and let them lead and be a part of that. And me be the color commentary, not the main commentator. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So it takes a level, this is going to sound weird, it takes a level of humility that challenges me. It takes a level of surrender to I have enough ego to want to be the expert. Like that guy that wants to be smart and wants to be the doer and the answer man, like the whole Staples button that you press, that was easy. I want to be that easy button for people. And so surrendering that is, now on the other hand, I have never been more hungry to learn. So what I'm doing is I'm listening to the pain points of our pastors. And as I release revitalization as a whole to Jimbo, I just finished certification in Working Genius, because I really feel like when I look around our pastors of large churches, they need a tool to help them synergistically figure out how to take the young leaders on their team and mobilize them and empower them. I'm also about to go into a certification for Crucial Conversations. Both of these were expensive and both of them are time consuming. But Crucial Conversations basically says if you need a special set of skills when emotions are high, outcomes are important, and opinions are different. And every church that I know of has those conversations. Almost.
I was going to say, you're describing a church, is what you're describing.
Yes.
Yeah. And so,
all the time.
I'm doing a deep dive for every church in that area. So why did I use those two? Because I know I'm in a better, if I'm not learning and stretching and trying to find and being creative, that's one of my warning lights. One of my warning lights is when I'm not hungry to add value to something, I know I'm not in a good place. So I rambled a little bit. Does that make sense to your question?
Absolutely. That's fantastic. And again,
Okay.
It was an open-ended question of like, you could have taken it any direction you wanted to.
Yeah.
And I think that's helpful for us to continue to see how you're handing off and you're continuing to learn, you're continuing to grow as a leader in both areas. Because I think, as you admitted, being very transparent and raw, which I think is helpful for all of us, as you said, it was hard for you to hand that off. But in some ways, that's a growth for you as well. That's growing for you because you're learning to hand something off that you're inherently good at. And so even in the painful area of handing something off, you're still growing. So at 60 years old, you're still growing and learning in both areas of handing things off, but also learning new things. And so, Bob, I'm just saying, you give me enough in the first 10 minutes of this podcast where I need to go debrief. I've been taking notes the whole time, and I don't know how much more I could soak up this today. So, Josh, what other questions do you have for Bob? You have anything else for Bob as we kind of wrap and kind of begin to land this plane today, this conversation?
Yeah, I would just say, what are your final thoughts? Like maybe as you think through all that we've talked about with not only networks and knowing the triggers and things that we each have to figure out how to replenish and how to be healthy, what would be some final thoughts for, for those of us that are listening in and saying, hey, I want to grow as a leader. I want to, what are some takeaways that you feel like they could apply today?
Yeah, I would say this, identify one strength and figure out how you're going to grow in it, whether it's read a book, whether it's call a practitioner, whatever, find a strength and strengthen it. Ask yourself a real question. What are the repetitive pain points that I've got to solve? Like, what is not points, but what's the repetitive pain point that I have to address somehow? So those two things. The other thing would be to ask the question, who are my truth tellers? And don't assume they know. Call them and say, here's why I need you in my life. Because when you see this, that, or the other thing, I need you to call me out on it. I need that. Those would be the steps I'd take, for sure. So that, I mean, those would be it. And I guess the bigger umbrella, be honest with yourself about pride and fear, man. Just be honest. Where is the pride? If like, so the thing with Jimbo, it's a pride thing and it's a fear thing. I mean, pride and fear are just the opposite sides of the same thing. Pride, I want to be known as an expert. Fear, what if I'm not known as an expert? You know, and we all seek for meaning. You know, we're always looking for what brings us meaning. So just do self-reflection. You know, ask your wife, you know, what does it seem that irritates me? What are some things that you wish you could say to me that I might need to? I will tell you, the greatest one of the greatest moments of my life for learning and transformation is when my only daughter told me that that when I'm concentrating, my face is angry. And she introduced me to something called RBF, which I'm not going to say here, but that she said that my resting face is not a pleasant face. Well, can I tell you, I'm glad I learned that at 51. So nobody had the courage to tell me that when I'm concentrating, I can look angry. And so it was, so you guys may not know it. So this is so goofy. See these? Right here on my camera, I have a smiley face to remind me that what I'm thinking, to be sure that I'm smiling. So anyway, that's way more than you asked for. This has been fun, guys. I appreciate the opportunity.
It's not way more than they asked for. That's transparent. That's raw. That we're talking to a leader of leaders that has to put a smiley face on his camera so he can remember to smile because someone told him that he has an angry face when he's thinking and concentrating. And so I think that's huge. I think we need more of that. And so, Bob, I thank you for bringing the real and the transparency and the, you know, just the whole package when it comes to, you know, learning from leaders and things of that sort. So, Josh, it has been fun. And we want to encourage you, if you're listening in, to reach out to us if there's anything we can ever do and help you connect. And do go check out First Coast Churches. They have some resources there. We'll drop some resources in the spot down below this podcast, wherever you're listening to it. But thanks so much for listening in from Josh and Bob and myself here at the Pastor Pod. It's been a great week. Have a great weekend, a great week ahead of you. Hope to see you back here next week for more real and open and transparent conversations. See you now.